us. And on behalf of the Department of Education, I'd like to welcome you all here. Begin by thanking all of our participants for being flexible and changing up our format a little bit today. And I did have a little bit more formal opening remarks that I was going to make, but I think in lieu of those, I would like to ensure that we have ample time to engage and discuss what we're going to hear. So I think let's get right into the first panel's presentations. And I'm going to introduce those participants a moment. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Troy Ide, a former U.S. attorney. He practices law in Denver, Colorado, and during the time after the Columbine tragedy, Troy served as an ex officio member of the Columbine Review Commission while also serving as chief counsel to former Governor Bill Owens. I'm going to ask Troy to go ahead with his remarks, and then we'll introduce each of the other panelists as they present. Welcome, Troy, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Commission members and everyone who's here. I will speak very briefly. I have a statement that I'm happy to provide for the record. What I would say is that this is a very personal and professional matter to me, the subject matter. I've lived in our community where Columbine is part of our school district for 48 years. I went to public school there, had one son graduate from the high school next door. My daughter's in high school right now. And this has been a momentous chain of events 19 years ago that continues to reverberate in so many ways. Governor Owens established a commission because at the time of the Columbine shooting, less than an hour after the shooting started, we didn't know that it was actually over at that time. We got in a vehicle, the governor and I did, and a state trooper, and we went to the staging area where the students were being evacuated. And I want to just mention this because of how far we've come. No incident command. The idea of having an incident command structure was something that developed out of the Columbine Commission and many other kinds of changes in police tactics that flowed in that era. The radios did not talk to each other. We had a situation where I was literally drafted in. I had a walkie-talkie in one hand. I had a cell phone in the other. I had Sheriff John Stone on the cell phone, and I had the State Patrol and others on the other line. We were trying to do things like position a helicopter on the roof, and the radios didn't talk, and we didn't have dispatch, so we were all volunteering. And then just the aftermath of trying to deal with a crime scene of that scale, the numbers of victims, victim notification. We never had anything like that in our county. And I just say that there were really three areas as we looked at this from an independent standpoint with a group of experts, a bipartisan group, lots of different backgrounds, came out with a report. The first really focused on the police response and the emergency response. And I would just say for this group, we have a lot of work to do, but that has been the area that I've observed, having done other after-action reviews of police and first responders of school shootings. That's where we made the most progress. It's really been the case that going after the active shooter quickly and being able to not wait for SWAT. Keep in mind at Columbine, the attack was over in 13 minutes. Law enforcement didn't enter the building for 47 minutes. Coach Dave Sanders was bleeding to death. The students had the sign in the window. One bleeding to death, I bleeding to death. The first responders were looking at the sign. They wanted to go in. 3 hours passed before they were allowed to go into that room. And that was just the way police were trained. It's not a criticism of law enforcement or anyone else. It's just that it was not a hostage situation the way we had thought it would be. And so we have made some progress there. We have radios that talk to each other. We have much more collaboration going on in how we plan. We have those exercises that our kids complain about that are so important. The second thing I would just say is in the general recommendations is simply the idea of closer coordination and information sharing with law enforcement. Here I think we've made progress too, but we've taken some steps backward. I talk in my statements, and I won't go into it here, but I'm happy to answer questions about it, about the fact that at Columbine, there were the two assailants, Harris and Claybolt. The district knew a lot about what they were about. They didn't tell the police. The police knew an awful lot. In fact, they've been in and out of the juvenile justice system repeatedly. There was no notification to the school. Now our laws have been changed in our state and basically all the states to facilitate that. We had, though, some changes in federal law that I don't think have been as helpful as they could be. I specifically talk about the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act at 20 U.S.C. 1232G. I think that the commission might want to look at that. We just had our state attorney general issue an opinion to districts to explain why it is that schools are not liable if they report information about problem students, potentially violent students, to police. That has been an issue throughout our state, so much so our AG has actually had to try to clarify the law in that regard. But it's a federal statute, and it's something you might want to look at. So I go through how that works and what I think we've learned, at least from one perspective in Colorado. The final area, and then I'll stop my remarks here. We focused a lot at Columbine on the need, working with FBI profilers and others, to come up with predictive models. Which students are really dangerous? How do you act early? And the answer is we've not made much progress at all on that, in my opinion. Again, it's not a criticism, but we need to focus on the harder issues, it seems to me. We heard a lot of testimony, and other commissions, I think, have heard testimony in the years since. But part of the problem is that we are still, I think, fixated on the true threat standard. When I was a U.S. attorney, I handled the true threat cases against both Senator John McCain and Senator Barack Obama in 2008 in federal court. And I know what it is to prove out a case. Is there really a threat to kill someone? It's a high burden, and I understand why it is. I think in a police environment, that you have to give clear instructions and clear rules. But when you're talking about a school environment, it's so different. So I would simply say that we might want to look at that standard. Do we want really that standard to apply in school settings? It may well be that we want to err more on the side of inclusion, civil holds, the ability to say, we want to evaluate this person. We heard he has a violent tendency. He's threatened others in a school setting. We don't know if he can carry it out, which is what the law requires you prove, but we want to be able to detain that person. Now, I think they should have due process rights, right to counsel, and so on. But there should be a means of taking a pause and being able to investigate that so that that person is removed from a setting where they could potentially hurt other people. And so I talk a bit about this in the statement. We explored those ideas back in 2000, 2001 when we wrote our report. But I think that the 25 attacks since really have shown a consistent inability to deal with problems. We typically know that there's a problem with somebody and we typically don't act. And then we wonder why we didn't act. So I think that that's where this commission also can really have a significant impact. So it's a hard conversation to have, but these are the kinds of conversations I'm really glad that you're addressing here. So I'll be glad to take questions, and I really do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Troy. We're going to hold on questions until after our four panelists have had a chance to speak. So I'm going to next introduce Mr. Michael Mulhare. Mr. Mulhare is currently the Assistant Vice President for Emergency Management at Virginia Tech and came to the university in 2008 to serve as its first Emergency Management Director. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. So that's true. I did arrive at Virginia Tech in 2008, but my son and daughter were actually seniors in 2007, and were both on campus that day. We were very fortunate. We learned very early that they were safe. They would learn later that day that one of their friends and 31 other Hokies would not be as fortunate. And it was very difficult as a parent and as an emergency manager to kind of process that. The parent in me wanted to go to Blacksburg and make sure they were okay or bring them home. And in the end, actually, it was kind of the emergency manager that won out that discussion. And my wife and I realized it was very important for them to be part of their community, to grieve and process with the rest of the Hokies, with the rest of Hokie Nation. Again, not an easy decision to make, but we thought that was the best approach. When I had an opportunity to join Virginia Tech, I did not hesitate, and I thought I could provide value and I had some skills that I could offer to build on existing foundations. But for me, it was also an opportunity to give back. I thought what Virginia Tech did for my son and daughter and the rest of the community was pretty profound. And again, it was a rare opportunity and a privilege to be part of that. And again, what I really want to talk about today are some of the programs and processes and protocols that we've put in place since that day. One of the things that it's important to consider is no two universities or colleges are alike. While their missions are similar, there are many differences in focus, size, location, and resources. If you don't know Virginia Tech, it's a large research institution with a daily population of about 40,000, sits on 2,600 acres in a relatively rural area in Southwest Virginia. And what may be appropriate might be the right tools for Virginia Tech may not be the same for an urban campus or perhaps a small liberal arts college, and I think that's important to consider. And when I look at how we do things, we use a holistic programmatic model. And the reason we do that is there is opportunity to force multiply resources and efforts by incorporating specific needs within an all-hazard approach. You'll see a lot of work, a lot of discussion about having multiple separate plans on how you do things. That's actually very taxing on resources. You want to find out where you can force multiply and where there's overlap. Areas of procedure, protocol, and resource overlap become apparent, The approach we use at Virginia Tech incorporates is the phases of emergency management: mitigation, preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery with our mission. And the mission of my office is to build and sustain and improve three things: university resiliency, departmental readiness, and individual preparedness. And that creates for us a 3x5 matrix, and everything we do, everything we build fits within that matrix, fits within those parameters. And within university resiliency, there are many initiatives encompassing several of these elements. And one of them I want to talk about is threat assessment. The threat assessment team is multidisciplinary at Virginia Tech, comprised of representatives from the Dean of Students, Provost, Counseling, Legal, Human Resources, Student Affairs, and the Police Department. Its mission is to determine if an individual poses or may reasonably pose a threat of violence to oneself or to others at Virginia Tech, and intervene and avert the threat and maintain safety. The threat assessment team serves as really the hub, the nucleus of information, and that information comes from the police, administration, faculty, student services, and human resources, and the community. And the message that the team likes to say to the community when they're asked, should you report something, and the message is, it might be nothing but. So share that information, because somebody else may have the same information, and collectively that may mean something. The team meets weekly and manages annually over 400 individual cases. And the trend of that is increasing. The number of cases seems to increase every year. The team also looks at students before they arrive at Virginia Tech. As part of the application, there's a community of standards section. And in that section, you have to self-disclose if you've been subject of school disciplinary actions or been convicted of a crime, with the exception of obviously minor traffic incidents. So we take a look at the incoming population as well. In response to the tragedy of April 16th, Virginia Tech established a security infrastructure working group, and many of the recommendations from this group have been implemented, and included the removal and replacement of perimeter door hardware so doors could not be chained or locked. Installing locks on interior doors in classrooms, so it's possible now to lock a classroom door. Increase the number of buildings that have electronically managed perimeter security, and the deployment of surveillance camera network across the campus. Prior to 2007, there were at most a dozen cameras on Virginia Tech campus. Now there's close to 600. Virginia Tech, through written policy, established the Safety Security Policy Committee, SSPC, which is comprised of senior leadership, legal department, police department, and emergency management. And the function of the committee is to review, evaluate, and determine requirements for safety, security, and preparedness. The committee meets at least quarterly to review emerging issues and concerns. Much of what we talked about are some of the events you saw, for instance, at Charlottesville, demonstrations, and what happens should a demonstration become violent. During an incident, they assemble to provide support and guidance to the university president, tasked with leaning forward, establishing high-level goals and objectives, and coordinating with state and federal partners. We also have a university relations office, which serves as the public information officer and is supported by a communication team. The policy committee is further supported by an incident management team, which is staffed by subject matter decision makers. These are the doers, who develop and implement incident response strategies and actions. Virginia Tech has a crisis emergency management plan which provides direction, guidance, and organizational structure. And one document that I think is somewhat unique that we've developed over the last couple of years is a community assistance plan. And the plan coordinates community support services, including an assistance center for families if that might be needed, and also meets the needs of the larger community, immediate needs of the larger community. Training and exercise is an important university resilience strategy. The goal of the program is to reinforce a preparedness culture, practice individual roles and responsibilities that might occur during an incident, and to identify areas to improve plans, protocols, and procedures. In the past year, 6,900 faculty and staff have participated in some sort of training events, and over 450 have participated in a multitude of exercises we've undertaken. Communication and alerting. VT Alert is the university's emergency notification system. It's multi-channel mass communication system, and this is very important in today, where everybody has a personal device. Everybody believes that they should be communicated with individually. So we talked to the community a lot about sharing messages when you receive a notice. The reason it's multi-channel is because no system is 100% reliable, and the communication system needs to work when we need it to work. There are also different constituent communication preferences, which we're seeing. And since the goal is to deliver messages to the greatest number of community members, it is important to consider these preferences. And the preferences change. When we first initiated the system, email was the choice, then text messaging, and now we're finding social media is how our community wants to be contacted. So alerting systems must evolve to meet these changing expectations. Currently, we have 10 delivery channels in use and have others in development. We're very pleased that over 95% of our students subscribe to our alerting system. The alerting system is also supported by a series of protocols, the emergency notification protocols. And the purpose of this document is to identify how the alert system will be utilized, reduce the decision-making time to the lowest possible level about sending an alert. We believe that's key. Who's authorized to send a message. And the protocol describes the content requirements of an emergency message. All initial messages contain three things: what happened, where it happened, and what action we want the community to take. Many messages are pre-scripted for a couple of reasons. One, it decreases the time it takes to prepare the message, and also it ensures that the character limitation meets some of the requirements of some of the channels. Departmental readiness, another one of the cornerstones of our program, has two primary initiatives. The first is the development of emergency action plans. And the purpose of these plans is to provide actionable information for building occupants. These plans consider unique building characteristics or provide direction on how to secure in place, shelter in place, and evacuate. We use the term secure in place at Virginia Tech. We don't use the term lockdown, in part because the campus is so large. There's over 200 buildings. There's 18 major roads on the campus. There's really no physical way to lock the campus down. The second initiative is the establishment of Building Emergency Coordinator Program. The program is supported by university employees who actually volunteer their time to work with our office, to be liaisons with those who occupy the buildings, and also serve as a point of contact for first responders. The last area I wanted to talk about is individual preparedness, and it's the most challenging. It's challenging to get an age group 18 to 22 demographic interested in emergency preparedness. They've got many other things on their plate and what they're engaged in. So how do we do that? We advertise our programs. We take every opportunity to meet and engage with students. Emergency management, our office staffs informational booths at orientation, campus festivals, employee events, and any other gathering. The police department has a residential life resource officer program and is actively engaged in community policing. It's also important to be recognized. Branding is key, and for us, our brand is Be Hokie Ready. And we chose that for one reason. Virginia Tech, everybody associates with being a Hokie, and obviously we want everybody to be prepared. Information regarding what to do in emergency must be readily available. And we have transitioned from hands out and posters to Z-cards to now using an emergency preparedness app. And the utility of the app is that it provides easy, accessible, just in time, what to do in emergency information. And for example, if we issue a VT alert that requires you to secure in place, and you don't remember from orientation what secure in place means, a swipe or two on your phone provides that information. It's just in time, it's instantaneous. presentation, Safety, Security, and Preparedness is provided to all students during orientation, onboarding of new employees, and by request. The presentation reviews VT alerts, the app I just mentioned, explains what it means to shelter in place, what to do in an evacuation, why it is important to have a buddy. The Blacksburg Police Department and the Virginia Tech Police Department sponsor a program called No Hokie Left Behind. Why you need to have a plan. How would you egress a building in an emergency? Why do you need to have a minimum amount of resources with you at all time? What to do if there's an active assailant? What does it mean if a VT alert states to secure in place? What to do if you cannot secure a place and need to take other actions such as run, hide, or fight? What if someone wants to enter your secure space? What can you expect from first responders, particularly law enforcement during an active shooter or other active assailant? This discussion was actually added to our presentation after talking with one of our survivors, who has since became a friend and a colleague. And she described her confusion and fear as she lay wounded, listening to the commands and conversations of law enforcement. And we realized from talking with Christina that we spend a lot of time and effort telling our community how we want them to act, what we want them to do. But we don't provide much information on why we're doing the things that we're doing. And we think it's important for them to know that. So should they find themselves in that type of situation and the police officer asks them to show their hands, why they need to show their hands and why that's important. So we spend a lot of time trying to create an understanding of why law enforcement does what it does. And last, I wanted to mention collaboration and the free sharing of ideas and practice that occurs within higher education. I think higher education recognized very early that you could not individually accomplish all that needs to be done. And with state and regional organizations, athletic conference relationships, federal partners and national forums such as the Disaster Resilient University Network, the International Association of Emergency Managers Universities College Caucus, the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrations, platforms are provided to exchange ideas, discuss challenges and successes. And I'll just mention one really quick. A recent accomplishment has been the establishment of the National Intercollegiate Mutual Aid Agreement. And as of today, I think we have 1,670 universities and colleges that have signed on to that. So we can support each other in a moment of crisis. If there's any questions you have, I'd be happy to answer those. And if there's any additional information we can provide about what Virginia Tech does and how we've developed our programs, be glad to share that. We've only really touched on a few of those here.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. Our next speaker is Mr. William Majelski. Mr. Majelski is currently a senior consultant with several groups specializing in school safety, threat assessment, emergency management, and homeland security. Mr. Majelski recently retired after serving over 40 years at the Departments of Justice and right here at the Department of Education. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. First of all, if I may, I also want to commend Mike, and one of the things he didn't say is that he established a emergency management program at Virginia Tech and provided a tremendous amount of technical assistance and support to us here at the Department of Education as we stood up a program on emergency management in higher ed. The other thing I'd like to say, for those of you who are doing K through 12 programs and say, well, I want to take everything Mike is doing and move it down to elementary and secondary schools, it's not that easy, and it's much more complicated what he's doing than what we want to do in K through 12. But thank you for your efforts. I also want to point out in today's Washington Post that, again, there was another shooting in Illinois, where a law enforcement officer was able to stop that shooting while it was in place. The shooter was wounded, but it was ended pretty quickly. So, I was asked to do an overview of a report. It's called "Report to the President on Issues Raised by the Virginia Tech Tragedy." I was looking at notes as to somebody who wrote a note. I saw the note as Bill was selected because he was here during when the report was done. I said, I've been here long enough to do a review of the Magna Carta. So, but anyway, I was deeply appreciative of being asked to do that. It's a report, as I was reading it, rereading the report, I said is that this is a report that didn't quite make it to the New York Times top 10 list. But it did provide a very, very unique perspective on schools and safety, both K through 12 as well as higher ed. Matter of fact, it's a perspective which is so unique. It really, as I look at a whole host of other reports that have been done at the state and local level, this is unique. I should say that it's also parallels a lot of what you're doing here with your commission, because this is one of the only commissions where leadership at the federal agencies were asked to basically set up commissions, go out, take testimony, do hearings, and then come back. Usually, there's a group, there's a chairman, and there's members that do that. But this had three groups: the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Education, and the Attorney General. Basically, were the review. And they're doing something very similar to you. They're going out and they're not necessarily called hearings. They're information seekers, and they went to 12 sites from around the country. I should also point out that Kent was here at the Department of Education when this was done, and actually made a visit to one of these locations, or maybe more. I know at least one visit that you made. So you got an expert here on this, right sitting next to you. Anyway, it was interesting, is because the purpose of the report was quite different than what we see in other reports. A lot of other reports, they say, well, tell me what I need to do, tell me what programs work. They get down into what I call getting 6 feet underground and start scratching around, rather than taking a broad view and say, what is our responsibility as a federal government? A lot of this was basically looking at the federal government and saying, what is our responsibility? It's not necessarily, getting on the ground and telling people what to do. It's basically setting a pathway. So the purpose was to summarize recurring themes. The commission went into this, and rightfully so, with the perspective is that they did not know everything there was to be known about school safety. And so what they were charged with doing is say, after you talk to everybody, not before, after you talk to everybody, come back with what your thoughts and ideas are. Secondly, what can the federal government do? One of the purposes was to identify what the government could do to support the efforts at the state and local level without impeding the local level. Oftentimes what happens is the federal government gets in the way of what's going on in the local. And there's a very strong emphasis here, is that let's not get in the way of what the government, the local, state and local entities are doing. Need to stress is that the commission did not seek to investigate specifics. It wasn't their task to say what went right, what went wrong, dig down into Virginia Tech or Columbine. That was done, and was done admirably by a whole other group. They came up with 5 findings, and I think the findings are interesting because they parallel a lot of what Troy said about Columbine. I want to quickly go over what those findings are and some of the recommendations. First of all, information sharing. What they ran into regarding information sharing, I see even today happening, and that is that, first of all, I would say FERPA, the great Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. If you go out, 99% of the schools you go to, you say, I want to speak to your FERPA expert. They're going to bring up maybe a teacher who's been there and dealt with it once. It's probably like Dr. Pepper, one of the most misunderstood pieces of legislation that we have. But what we saw at Virginia Tech, one of the major issues was there was a provision in the FERPA which said is that you can't give out information unless it was an emergency. So what the Department of Education did later after this thing, one of the things they did was basically say, you at the local level have the right to define what the emergency is. We're not going to define it for you. So some of the impediments to sharing information were taken care of. Some. And I agree with you 100%. There's still a whole lot of them out there. But this whole thing about information flow, and it's not only FERPA, it's state laws, it's local laws, it's health, HIPAA, and other regulations which really impede the progress of making decisions based upon facts and statistics rather than just hearsay. Secondly, information on firearm possession. As you know, the shooter in Virginia Tech had a firearm, probably should have been able to purchase the firearm, And what the committee discovered was that we, meaning the 50 states, were not doing a good job in inputting information to the NICES system. So people who had certain handicaps, had certain provisions that shouldn't have purchased a weapon, and one of them was if they were involved in domestic violence, another one if they were locked up, not locked up, but referred for mental health issues, should not be able to purchase a weapon. And one of the findings was that they were not compliant with that. Third is that they really felt that there was a need for awareness and communication. It gets back to today when we talk about this, we talk about see something and say something. You see something, say something. Don't hold it back. And what they were interested in is there was a beginning, and Marisa, Dr. Randazzo is going to talk a little bit about this, is this whole issue of warning signs. And they basically said is that we know that there are warning signs out there, but we're not always complying with these warning signs. We're not taking them into consideration. From a threat assessment perspective, is that we say see something, say something, do your threat assessment. But the flip part of that, the next part of that, the next chapter says manage the threat assessment. Just don't say, hey, you need help, and then wash your hands and walk away. It's really basically saying is that how can we manage that overall issue. Mental health was a big thing for the commission. Is that one of the things they said is that making sure that services are available is one of the key parts of any true prevention and intervention strategy. No matter how well you do prevention, no matter what you do in prevention, if you don't have a strategy that deals with mental health, you're not going to do a good job. And so they were very concerned about that. Better sharing of information regarding what works. I can't tell you how much money we've spent when I was here at the Department of Education on prevention and early intervention, how much money the Office of Juvenile Justice spent on the same thing, how much money SAMHSA spent, how much money CDC spent. But we're not sharing the information. We're not really doing a good job of saying is let's get together and make sure that we're not stepping over each other. Let's learn from our mistakes. And the commission basically said we really need to do a better job sharing of information. Lastly, there was a recognition, although not part of the findings, that Homeland Security is also part of this game. And nowhere were they ever mentioned. But they also make grants. They talk about terrorism. They talk about other aspects that impact schools and impact kids and need to be brought to the table. From the themes and observations, there were basically three things. One, the commission was set on the fact is that there's no one-size-fits-all solutions. We can't at the federal government come up and say, if you just do this, it'll be okay. We have 15,000 school districts. We have 50 million kids, over 50 million kids in schools. And I think to say that everybody basically needs to do the same thing is totally off target. Now, there's key principles, I would argue, everybody needs their key principles, but that model, that structure, how it works, has to be contingent upon what your problem is, where you are, what resources you have, a whole host of other things. Two is the theme that you see throughout has to do with mental illness. And no matter where the commission went, this whole issue of mental illness, however you want to define it, and mental illness as it's related to depression and failure in school and lack of learning, suicide prevention, that was a theme that really filtered throughout the entire commission. Lastly is that one of the things that the commission sought to do and basically wanted to make sure to do is that balance the individual liberties and privacy with safety and security. And a lot of this gets into FERPA. How do we basically, on the one hand, share information at the same time protecting your privacy, but yet the safety of everybody? And so it's an issue which they saw throughout every place that they visited. So based upon those findings, the commission made 17 federal recommendations and 17 state and local recommendations. I am not going to burden with you with reading all 34 recommendations, but I will talk about a couple of them because I think they're interesting. Review of FERPA and HIPAA. recommended, let's make some changes, and they did. Education in collaboration with Secret Service and DOJ should explore research on targeted violence in institutions of higher education and continue to share existing threat assessment methodology, which we've done. Should continue to work with states and local communities to improve, expand collaboration on Safe Schools, Healthy Students program. The committee was very interested in this program. It was a program which we funded here at the Department of Education. One of the things it did was take 3 agencies, the Office of Juvenile Justice, SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and Department of Education, and say is that we're much stronger coming together and putting our dollars and cents together and our expertise and our skills, and basically looking at prevention and looking at safe schools, not from the fact that we're going to start at 12th grade or 11th grade or whatever it is, but we need to basically get involved in pre-K and right up through high school. We need to get families involved. We need to do mental health. And in doing that, we need to cut through the bureaucracy and get rid of the silos that exist out there. And that's what this program essentially did. For the first time, it took money from 3 federal agencies, put it in a pot, and said, when you apply for money, you don't have to do 3 progress reports. You don't have to do 3 federal reports on financial. This is what you need to do. And the committee recognized that type of unique approach to safety and security is what's needed. Now, in closing, I want to say what Mike said, alluded to, and discussed a little bit, and that is the progress that we've made. We've made significant progress since Virginia Tech, significant progress since Columbine. There's even been progress in the short time between now and Sandy Hook. There has been progress. You know, we developed an emergency management program for K through 12, as well as for higher ed. And I honestly believe is that if we didn't do that, it's not that it could be continued forever, but basically do the spark, start the fire going, and then, you know, basically move on. We now have, not only do we have every school in this country that has an emergency management plan, most of them are good plans. Most of them are plans that are, there's training, there's exercises for. Development of threat assessment strategy. The committee said is that we should look and further that. We should basically make sure that we have some strategy for that. That is being done. Virginia as a state is the first state in the country to basically mandate that every school, every college, every university, public college and university, have a strategy for threat assessment. Eligibility for Project Serve. I know, Madam Secretary, you Project Serve, that started after Columbine. It started because we couldn't find a way to get money to schools. Initially, we thought that the only thing that we were going to use those dollars for was shootings and other issues like that that occur at K through 12 schools. We expanded that after Virginia Tech and the shooting in Southern Illinois to everybody. Safe Schools, Healthy Students program linked to 3 agencies. Safe Schools Initiative basically began to recognize, afford us a better understanding of who are those kids. And believe me, for the most part, they are kids, they're not adults, who go into our schools and basically shoot and injure other students and teachers. Who are they? And Dr. Randazza is going to talk a little bit about who they are. And the develop of a dedicated technical assistance center. So we had then, as you have now, a center which is dedicated to these issues: emergency management, school safety, violence prevention. And I think they do an invaluable part in ensuring that schools that need help, need assistance, get that assistance. So in closing, I'd say is that we made significant inroads in ensuring our schools remain safe places. I'd also say is that there's a host of new challenges that we didn't face 4 or 5 years ago, and we need to find a way to address those challenges. Challenges range from different forms of cybercrime, cyberbullying, to opioid use, and the use of social media, to terrorism and trafficking. There's a whole bunch of new issues, and we're going to have to find a way how to overcome that. Success in overcoming these challenges can only be achieved if school safety remains a priority The federal agencies continue to support practices that have proven to be effective while eliminating those for which there is no evidence of effectiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. Our last speaker of the panel is Dr. Marissa Reddy Randazzo. Dr. Randazzo is currently the Director of Threat Assessment at Georgetown University. She served as the Chief Research Psychologist of the U.S. Secret Service at the time of the release of the joint U.S. Secret Service and Department of Education report titled The Final Report and Findings of the Safe School Initiative, Implications for the Prevention of School Attacks in the United States. And she was a co-author with Bill of this report.
That's right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary and members of the Commission. It is an honor to be here today because we have information that Bill Modulewski and our co-authors and I developed through this unique joint study that the U.S. Department of Education and U.S. Secret Service conducted together that really show us how we can prevent school shootings and provide a very basic, straightforward roadmap about how we do that. You've heard reference throughout the speakers on the panel already about the importance of threat assessment. So I'm going to explain to you the underpinning of why threat assessment works, and then also explain to you what it is. It is very simple. I've got two reports here that Bill Modulewski and I co-authored, along with Brian Voskil and Dr. Robert Fine, Dr. William Pollack, Dr. Randy Borum, and John Berglund. They are still available on various websites. It's the Final Report and Findings of the Safe School Initiative and Threat Assessment in Schools, a guide to managing threatening behavior and creating safe school climates. Everything I'm going to talk about are detailed already in these reports, including a step-by-step process that school personnel, law enforcement professionals, mental health professionals, and others can follow to evaluate threatening behavior and figure out if someone is, as we call it, on the pathway to violence. And most of all, figure out how do we stop that and how do we intervene to get them off that pathway. So as Bill Modulewski was mentioning, the project we conducted together was called the Safe School Initiative, and it really had a unique genesis. In the wake of the Columbine attack in 1999, a series of discussions happened between the Secretary of Education, who at the time was Richard Riley, and the Director of the Secret Service, who at the time was Brian Stafford, who started talking about how can we get a handle on whether prevention is even possible. What can we understand about school shootings? And the reason why the Secret Service was even at the table was because the Secret Service had recently completed its own research, behavioral research, on attacks on public officials and public figures. And from that research, the Secret Service learned a lot they hadn't known before, and learned a lot that dramatically enhanced how they evaluate threats to public officials and public figures, and how they intervene. We don't have time to talk about it today, but one of the things that surprised me when I first started working at the Secret Service was that so many agents who work these threat cases serve almost in a social worker capacity, connecting someone who's threatening to engage in violence with resources and support services that they need, be it a ride to get their medication or go see their psychologist or whatever the case may be. And we do the same thing in school threat assessment. We connect people with help that they need when they are feeling disconnected and disengaged and desperate and on a pathway to violence. So the two agencies agreed to take the same research approach, and it was a unique research approach because the challenge in studying school shootings is that we're really looking at, and studying targeted school shootings, studying what's known as a low base rate but a high impact event. So statistically something that doesn't happen all that often, shootings that are carried out by students or former students attacking their schools on purpose, but that each one has such a significant impact, we want to be able to get a handle on it and prevent them. So this launched a joint initiative between federal law enforcement and federal education officials that we had not seen previously. And it continues to be a tremendously beneficial relationship and liaison. So Bill Modulewski and I were essentially sent out on the road for about 18 months to study every act of targeted school violence around the country that occurred over about a 25-year period. In total, we studied 37 school shootings involving 41 shooters. And we also had the occasion not only to do a deep dive through the criminal justice investigations and collateral interviews with witnesses and going through school records and mental health records, etc., but we also had the opportunity to interview 10 school shooters in prison. And the data that we got in these reports come from the deep dive into all of the investigations. The stories that we tell in these two reports come in part from the prison interviews that we had occasion to do. So there were a couple of major things that we uncovered in studying school shootings that previously we hadn't known. I'm here to present these findings, but I'm also here really to give you a roadmap for how we can use these to prevent school shootings around the country now. First and foremost, as we looked at these, and these were really the universe of cases of school shootings, we found out quickly that school shooters don't snap. We often hear in the media that they just snapped, this was impulsive, no one could see it coming. And the fact of the matter is that is not the case. Rarely do we see these individuals just snapping. Instead, they follow a progression of behavior that's potentially detectable. It's often known to other people, or potentially observable if you start to take a close look at what they're doing. And it is a progression that we refer to as the pathway to violence. So as we studied school shootings, and this is true of other acts of targeted violence in workplaces and higher ed, but looking at these K-12 shooters, we saw that they first come up with an idea to do harm, and then they develop a plan for how they want to carry that out. Then they have to develop the means, the lethal means to engage in this level of harm and other preparatory steps. And then they actually implement the attack itself. So in short order, when Bill and our colleagues and I work on threat assessment cases on what's now a daily basis, we try to figure out, is the person we're worried about on this pathway to violence? And if so, why? It is usually because of highly personal reasons. I'll explain more in a minute. But if they're on this pathway to violence, how can we get them off? What are the underlying personal problems that they feel despondent over? They've lost a vision of a way out. They've lost hope. But how can we get them off the pathway to violence and keep them off the pathway to violence? And when we work cases now, and when we train schools and districts how to do this, it is quite feasible to get someone off a pathway to violence and to keep them off a pathway to violence. So instead of being impulsive, we see school shootings as the end result of an understandable and largely detectable progression of behavior. So from a prevention angle, this is actually good news for us. We stand a chance at identifying a student or other person who's posing some threat. Maybe it's a former staff member, maybe it's a parent, maybe it is an estranged domestic partner of an employee at the school, knowing that that's where they can find their former partners at their place of work. So we can use this threat assessment process to figure out, is someone on this pathway to violence, and how do we get them off? Second major finding that really startled me and I think surprised us collectively as a research team was that prior to nearly all school shootings in the U.S., the school shooter or the would-be shooter tells other people about these violent plans beforehand. We have seen this in detail in a number of the recent shootings that we see, not only in K-12 schools, but in other domains as well. And that they will tell other people what they're thinking about and planning to do in different modalities. So sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's in a homework assignment, but oftentimes in this day and age it's on social media, in a platform that's publicly viewable, that other people have the opportunity to look at, and most importantly to pass along and alert someone that someone's talking about it. When we work active threat assessment cases, and we ask someone, well, what did you mean by that post on Instagram or on Twitter? Are you thinking about planning something harmful? They will say, honestly, yes. This is what I'm thinking about planning to do, and this is why. I don't see any other way out. I feel like violence is my best option or the only option I have left. They are forthcoming. They don't keep these plans a secret. So again, from a prevention standpoint, this gives us hope and good news that there is information we can act upon. If the people who see those posts or hear that concerning communication know to get it to someone. We also know, as we looked across all of these school shooters, that there was no accurate or useful profile. We can't tell by looking at someone from outward appearance, whether it's range or gender or socioeconomic status, racial makeup, anything like that, whether we should be more concerned or less concerned. We cannot tell by outward appearance. And I will tell you, federal law enforcement made a misstep long before we engaged in this study trying to get a profile out because there was nothing that law enforcement had to go on. And the profile at the time was that we should be worried about white male students between the ages of 14 and 17 who were angry some of the time, wore black clothing some of the time, and liked to listen to loud music. Chances are high that you know someone who fits that description. for some of you, you may have met that description in your younger days in high school. It is not informative. It is not effective. And most importantly, if we use a profiling approach instead of looking at behavior, a profile can distract us and take our attention away of what should we focused on. So while that profile was being circulated, there was a 13-year-old girl. So she didn't match on gender, didn't match on age. She was Caucasian, so she matched on race. But she wasn't angry some of the time. She spent a lot of her time in school and at home in tears in her room, or in tears in the bathroom or the classroom. She didn't own black clothing, and she had no way to listen to loud music. Her parents wouldn't allow it. But she had been telling her friends for months that she was going to bring her father's gun to school and shoot the girls who had been mean to her all year. And that's exactly what she did. So we know that looking at someone from outward characteristics doesn't help solve this problem. But looking at behavior does. And taking a step to look into what else is going on with a person when we hear about a concerning communication or a threat of violence or plans of violence. We also know that the vast majority of school shooters had concerned multiple people beforehand. So not just telling their peers what they were thinking about and planning to do in terms of violence at school, but engaging in other behavior that alarmed teachers and coaches, the school nurse, parents of friends. These were not invisible students, former students. They were on not only one radar screen, but most of them were on multiple radar screens. So the challenge for us is that information is often out there. People are concerned, but they often don't know what to do to come forward and raise that. However, if you have a threat assessment team, as we're talking about, the threat assessment team can go talk to people who teach this student or work with this employee or coach this person and say, some folks are worried about how this particular person is doing. You work with them, teach them, coach them. What do you say? What do you see? And oftentimes, you will get the, you know what, this may be nothing but, as Michael Hare was talking about. Or, I'm glad you called. I wasn't sure what to do with this. I was worried I was misinterpreting, misunderstanding. I didn't want to get them in trouble. But a threat assessment process can pull all that information together. We also know that the majority of school shooters who carried out this violence at school were at a point of feeling absolutely despondent or desperate or even actively suicidal before carrying out their attack. Many of them actually included in their plans either plans to kill themselves at the end of the attack or were hoping for a suicide by cop. We're hoping that responding law enforcement would kill them in the process. Now, I want to be very clear about this. The majority of people in this world who are suicidal or despondent are not going to be at risk to others. But when we are worried about someone who has talked about violent plans or maybe considering violence to others, we look in every case to see if they are suicidal or at that point of desperation. We have laws and resources that can address someone who's at that point of desperation. And that's one of the ways we get them off the pathway to violence and keep them off the pathway to violence. There was one young man who encapsulates a lot of the findings I just described, who submitted a poem to his English teacher. He was taking a creative writing class his senior year, and the poem was "Sinking into bed, homicidal thoughts filling my head. Suicidal thoughts not gone but fleeing because it's other people's death I'm seeing. Suicide or homicide, homicide and suicide. Into sleep I'm sinking, why me I'm thinking. Homicidal and suicidal thoughts intermixing, I know my life is not worth fixing." And this wasn't the only homework assignment that he submitted. If someone submits a homework assignment like that, it's not necessarily diagnostic. It may indicate a problem. It may indicate that we have the next Stephen King on our hands. But it allows us a chance to look further, and that's what threat assessment does, is a chance to look further. This young man submitted a whole series of creative writing poems and short screenplays and short stories, all centered around this dilemma of whether he felt homicide or suicide was the better solution to his despair. Wow. And he actually decided on suicide. And he tried to commit suicide, and he failed to do so. When we talked to him in prison, he shared with us that he felt like if he committed suicide, then his would be the only life that ends, and his pain would end, and that's really what he wanted. He said, but then I tried and I failed to commit suicide. I already had felt like a loser, and I never knew I could feel even worse than I did. But I thought, I'm such a loser, I couldn't even kill myself. I couldn't even get that right. And so his plan was to engage in a school shooting, hoping police would kill him, hoping for a suicide by cop. And he had done so much research that he knew in his state, if he killed at least 2 people, that even if police didn't kill him in responding to the shooting, that the justice system should kill him, that should be eligible for the death penalty. He was 17 at the time that he carried this out, and he was not eligible for the death penalty and is now serving multiple consecutive life sentences. But it is a great example and a tragic example of someone who is exhibiting behaviors that we could have responded to. And we do now. We do a much better job in schools of using a threat assessment process to respond to it. So in a nutshell, threat assessment is essentially a group of individuals, school administrator, school resource officer, or local law enforcement, usually a school counselor, a school psychologist, some mental health professional, who will get together when there's some report of a concern. Someone who's engaging in threatening behavior, someone that a teacher or a coach is worried about isn't doing well, and they'll gather more information, gather those pieces of the puzzle, put it all together to see, is this person on a pathway to violence? And if so, why? What are those underlying personal problems? How can we help them solve it through nonviolent means? And when we get in and solve those underlying problems with them, they get off the pathway to violence and they stay off the pathway to violence. So, a couple of things that this field could use tremendously. One is to make sure we make threat assessment training available far and wide to school personnel, law enforcement, and mental health professionals around the country. They need this training. Bill and I did this years ago following the release of our report, and it was so well received, and we got lots of great feedback. It is a wonderful gesture that agencies can collaborate on together to make this training available. Law enforcement especially, it often doesn't get this training. So we now know, for example, that the Sandy Hook shooter had threatened to carry out his shooting at Sandy Hook 2 years prior to actually doing so. It was reported to local law enforcement, but they didn't feel like they could act because no crime had been committed yet. And they didn't have threat assessment training. So making sure law enforcement, in addition to our school personnel, gets this training is vital. And second, we need to update the Safe School Initiative. We learned so much from it, but our day and age has changed in terms of looking at the impact on social media. Social media, as a parent of an 11-year-old, I curse it on a daily basis, but social media can actually be tremendously helpful for looking into and identifying people whose behavior is starting to raise concern. So I think having a chance to update that study would be good. I thank you for the opportunity to present this information, and as a parent especially, I thank you for all you're doing to keep our kids safe. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marissa and Bill and Michael and Troy. We have a few minutes before we're going to take a planned break, and I want to leave some time for questions from the group here on this side of the table. I have a question to kick us off. You clearly did very in-depth work and research on your report. I'm curious what, if anything, from the report that is what you would consider to be really highly valuable and important has not been adopted or implemented at the federal level in particular, and if there are other, things that states can and should be doing. I know that's probably a very lengthy and complex answer, but I'm particularly curious at the federal level what has not been implemented or adopted that you would consider to be really important.
Well, Maurice and I may differ a little bit on this. I mean, one of the issues that we need to do is begin to take a look at threat assessment from the perspective of, does this work? And so what's where's the evaluation here? We have some evidence that it works, but if you look at it from a research perspective, researchers would say is that what you have really doesn't do what really that needs to be done. So I mean, it's that okay, we've done it, people like it, they it looks good, it smells good, it feels good, but is it good? It's one of those things. So, I mean, that's, to me, I think is the biggest issue we face.
Yeah. I think also a missing piece of information that really federal guidance could be helpful on is that there's a tremendous amount we can learn from studying prevented attacks, just like we did in studying attacks that have been carried out. And look at ways that make it easier for students or anyone else who has a concern to bring it forward. Because it is not that easy a decision. No matter how often we say, if you see something, say something, you could be turning in a friend. You could worry that you're making their life worse by bringing this information forward. So there's been some initial information, a pilot study done on that, but really we could learn so much from studying how attacks have been prevented and what has worked across, whether it's mental health intervention, law enforcement, student reporting, and the like. And then from a day-to-day basis, and this is more for Health and Human Services, but I know in working cases it would be easier to help get people the help they need if the bar for getting someone in for an involuntary psychiatric evaluation were lower. We've done this with FERPA, right? With FERPA, we've allowed people to say, you define what your emergency is. And then if there is that health and safety emergency or potential for emergency, you can share information. Right now, we still have that emergency language or imminent language in that we can't get someone in for a psychiatric evaluation, which is anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, not a lot of time. We can't get them in against their will if they won't go voluntarily unless we're at that point of imminence. And imminence is so incredibly hard to define that if we could lower that threshold a bit to allow for some other type of evaluation or a full involuntary evaluation, in those many cases where we are short of imminence but we have sufficient concern. I'm not a mental health attorney. I know there'd be a lot of debate around this, but as we work individual cases, that's often a stumbling block that's unnecessary that would be helpful to have reduced a little bit.
Okay. Other questions?
Secretary, thank you. And first of all, thanks to all of you. We still have more to hear from. And I know I speak for everybody in the room when I say how much we appreciate your time, your passion for this issue, and certainly not least your experiences. I've looked at this as a layman for a long time, and the one thing I keep seemingly coming back to is that in cases that started early on with multiple penetrations into different relationships along the way, whatever they were, far beyond just school, the trapdoor seems to be that while in some cases almost easy to identify potential problems, each silo never owns it. The silo can identify it, the person might penetrate that silo, but then move on to a different silo. And no one along the way, I'm generalizing obviously, but it seems to actually own it. So when a student can go to mental health services after finally having been identified as someone who desperately needs it, and then voluntarily walk away from those mental health services, and no one is there to pick that up and make certain to the greatest degree that they work to try to see if they can re-engage that youngster back into what they need most, which is mental health services. That's what I call it, is no one owns the issue. In all of your experiences, and I don't want to cut you all out either, but in all of your experiences, while I know you just can't identify someone to own it and say, if anybody else, you need to own this, because it's all different. A, is that feeling pervasive? And B, are there examples of how that ownership can be created along the way? And maybe it's not with one or one individual silo, but you see what I'm asking?
If I could just say one thing, the report to the president says this, but also a lot of research says this thing, is that we can't look at those individuals who need mental health services and who have mental health problems and say that's where the majority of our problems come from, that's where a majority of our crime comes from, because it doesn't. And so, it's the first thing I would say is that it's an issue we want to get them well, but they're not the major, say, the major group causing criminal acts. Do they have some behavioral problems? They may. Which one of the things that Marisa and I and the group that works on this on a regular basis said, okay, we never subscribed or prescribed, I should say, what should be on this threat assessment team. I've always argued is that there's nothing that says you can't put a youth probation officer on that team. There's nothing that says you can't put a youth judge on that team. And so you could, you make sure that those gaps, you constantly minimize those gaps, but you're never going to eliminate them, because a lot of the behavior is not criminal, and I could seek mental health services today and just say tomorrow, I'm not going to go anymore. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing, and that's probably right that there's nothing, because that gets back to this report, which says that we want to balance security with privacy. You get that balance. And so, unless that individual engages in some particularly abhorrent behavior or is suicidal, and we haven't had a long discussion about that, but Dr. Randazza will tell you is that a number of the cases we looked at is that there was, I forget how many, but a good percentage of those kids committed suicide along the way, after
the end of their attack.
At the end of their attack.
Let me add to this too. There is we have seen threat assessment become adopted within K-12 domains, in higher ed, in workplaces. But the missing piece really is a community-based threat assessment process that could own they leave one school and go to another, they leave one school and go to employment, or they leave a job and now they're at home. There's a wonderful example of how to do this well in Salem, Oregon. So the Salem Kaiser School District, but Bill and I went out, 2000, and trained them, their first school threat assessment team, and they stood up a school threat assessment team using the process that we have written about and talked about here. But they also said, look, we need something else to backstop this, to be able to track either cases of when students or former students leave school or employees leave their employment at school, but also to handle all non-school cases, domestic violence in the community, threats directed at their council members, things like that. So they stood up a parallel community-based multi-agency threat assessment team, and there's overlap between the two teams. So you've got Salem PD officers who've been doing this for years, serving on both teams, and really helped to coordinate that. So that's another piece of this. This is school shootings, as we've seen it, is one example of targeted violence, and targeted violence occurs in different domains. We can use the same process to prevent those acts in those other sectors and silos as well. We haven't seen many examples of community-based threat assessment, but I think that's a missing piece that could help.
Troy, did you have something?
Yeah, may I just add, threats of violence are not protected speech under the First Amendment. We forget that constantly. We are obsessed with the idea of, can they carry out the threat? If we actually criminalized the threat, which some countries do, which I think our First Amendment allows, you could get that person into the jurisdiction of law enforcement. It could be federal, it could be FBI, it could be state, it could be both. Then they go in, you attach the mental health service, you do a civil hold, you hold them, you evaluate them. We need to move in that direction. That's what we need to do.
I'll just add one thing. I know in Sandy Hook, and seemingly in all the other school shooting situations, there's really no responsibility or accountability to the school or other individuals afterwards. If you look specifically at Sandy Hook, there were state laws that were violated, etc. And there's no going back, and there's no responsibility. I think if people were held accountable, that might help as well.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks. Mike, anything before we?
Well, again, I think what Marisa said about the community, the overlap of threat assessment is really key. We had an officer shot on our campus in 2011. He wasn't part of our community. The shooter was not part of our community. He wasn't captured in our own threat assessment process. So that higher level, that wider data, I think is very key.
Good. I'm conscious of our time, and I want to give everyone a brief, very brief break, a moment before we dive into our second session. So I'm going to do that and suggest that we reconvene in 5 minutes. Just in advance of our next segment here, I just want to begin by acknowledging all of the individuals participating here and acknowledging the personal pain that each of you have experienced and undoubtedly still feel. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for coming here and sharing with us. We're very grateful for that. And I say that just to, in advance of what we're going to talk about here. I just want to acknowledge that real personal pain and experience. And again, thank you for being vulnerable to be here with us. We're going to first hear from Mr. Daryl Scott. Mr. Scott lost his 17-year-old daughter Rachel in the Columbine High School shooting, and he's since founded Rachel's Challenge, a national nonprofit organization that seeks to create safe and connected academic environments to enhance learning. Welcome, Daryl.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. And thank you, committee, for having us to come. I think it's important that we see the problems and the answers from many different viewpoints. And there are people who do the analytical studies, and then there are other people who are feet on the ground. And I know that Scarlett, who lost her son, and I lost my daughter, we found a life mission from our loss. And I had a mentor in my life. He was a World War I veteran, the only World War I veteran I ever knew. He's been dead for many years. His name was Norman Grubb, and Norman was a best-selling author back in the 1940s, 1950s. And he said something I never forgot. He said, Daryl, if you'll learn to be a see-througher and not a look-at-er, life will have purpose and meaning. Don't look at your circumstances and don't look at people. Learn to see through. And my daughter, in one of her diaries, she wrote about that, and she said, it wasn't until recently that I learned that the first, second, and third impressions can be deceitful of what kind of person someone is. She said, make the choice to not look at their appearance, but look into their soul. And after Norman died, people who know me know I like to write a lot of poetry, and I wrote a simple poem that we used to teach teachers and we used to teach students. And it goes like this. A wise old man once said to me, don't trust the things your eyes can see. For if you do, you'll know confusion, always judging by illusion. Don't look at, see through, my friend. Beyond the frown, the sneer, the grin. Peer deep into the living soul where beauty wonders will unfold. Fear and judgment fall apart when your view is from the heart. So don't look at, adjust your view, and focus deeper, seeing through. So when I do teacher trainings, we talk to teachers about not looking at the troublemaker at the back of the room, but seeing through to the kid having trouble making them. And some very good things have been said today. We have reached over 28 million students and teachers in the last 19 years. We have 50 presenters who travel worldwide. And our main focus is here in the United States, but I was just in Guadalajara 5 days ago celebrating with the school children there in Guadalajara 16,000 acts of kindness that they recorded over the last school year. And they celebrate those through paper chains. They record each act of kindness, and we have schools all across America doing that. We've had some massive rallies. We filled up the Georgia Dome with tens of thousands of students in Atlanta a few years ago, and they actually had to hire cranes to raise those acts of kindness to the ceiling. So part of what we talk about when we talk about preventing school violence is also talking about social emotional learning, dealing with those troubled kids and reaching out to those troubled kids with messages of kindness and compassion. There was a lot of emphasis after Columbine on anti-bullying programs. And our program, we have been told by experts that we prevent more bullying than any program that's been around. We don't call ourselves an anti-bullying program because we're not anti-anything. We're for things. You can either fight the darkness or you can light a match, light a candle. So our whole philosophy and approach, and I know Jessica's has been too, is to fight the darkness with the light. And we have seen 7 school shootings prevented that we know of, and there's probably been many that we don't know of. And we have seen an average of 3 students' suicides prevented every week of the year. We see over 150 of those every year. I brought a little book with me called Saved by Story. It has about 81 of those stories in it. I just want to start. These are emails, unedited, unsolicited, from students. And we receive phone calls, letters, Facebook entries. But the first 2 I'm just going to read starts off this way. Rachel's impact on me was that I decided not to pull the trigger. The day you came to my school, I was planning on committing suicide. Then Dave, your speaker, told us to close our eyes and think about everybody we care about. I was in foster care, My aunt said that she would take my sister and myself. I felt like I was always doing things wrong. I won't read the whole thing, but there's a life that was saved. And we see this happen every single week. The second one, the day you came to visit my school, only a few hours before the presentation, I had made plans to commit suicide that evening. It's not just the kids that are loners. It's one of the stories in here is from the head cheerleader whose brother was the quarterback on the football team. They had pledged a suicide pact together. And after we came and shared a story and then did some training, they changed their mind about taking their life. And she told us, she said, everyone in my school thought that we were the most popular kids. We were the ones that everybody envied. Nobody knew what we were going through on the inside. One of the things that I really would like, I wish that the federal government would consider, we've never received a penny of help from the federal government. We've never asked. But I wish there could be as much money put into long-term prevention with programs like Scarlet's, like ours, like others, Kickstart. Chuck Norris, who's a dear friend of mine, serves on our board of directors, has a program called Kickstart for Kids. And that program, our programs have been proven over and over and over again to not only prevent suicide, but to change the thought patterns of young people, because that's where all of it starts. And I'm just rambling. I'm not following anything I wrote down, so I'm sorry. But my daughter was a beautiful young lady. She had a heart of compassion, and she was the kind of kid that would bring home the stray dog, the stray cat, and she had actually reached out to Eric and Dylan, the two shooters at Columbine, and she challenged them because they were doing pantomimes in the school of shooting and killing people. And they had, and as was said earlier, there's always signs, there's always symptoms, and the kids know before anybody else does. And we've learned that because among the 7 school shootings that we've seen prevented, 4 of them were from students who reported after Rachel's Challenge was there that something was going to happen in their school. And we work with counselors, we work with police officers, we work with the justice system anytime that happens to follow up and make sure that not only do they not do it, but that they get help. Because every single school shooting has come from young people who feel disconnected. And our goal in the schools is to help connect children and to make them feel that they belong and to help them feel safe. We did a survey with 20,000 students, and we got 10,000 of those surveys back. It was before we came and after we came. And before we came, out of 10,000 students, 2,741 said, we feel safe in our school. Well, that's great for them, but look at the 8,000, roughly, that said they didn't feel safe. I work closely with Dr. Robert Marzano, who's one of the top K-12 researchers in the country, and we've written 2 books together. One's called Awaken the Learner, one's called Motivating and Inspiring Students. And a lot of the answers can be found in those books but it's not the sizzling thing. You know, the sizzling thing is the crisis. But the prevention begins way before the crisis. It has to start in the hearts and minds of young people. And I believe the first line of defense, honestly, comes from the youth, not from the police officers, but it comes way before the deed is done. And so we create service clubs in schools called Friends of Rachel clubs. We have tens of thousands of those clubs, and they do amazing things. And ironically, many of the kids who are the most the outsiders join that club because they find that they can belong. And the whole purpose of the club is simply to show kindness and compassion. And you can go to schools all across America and you will see their celebrations at the end of the school year where they take these pieces of paper, write down the acts of kindness that they observe, acts of kindness that they do, because we're told medically that our endorphins increase just when we witness an act of kindness. Foster Freeze, a dear friend of mine, is running for governor of Wyoming. He's going to win. He wins everything he does. And Foster said, I want Rachel's Challenge in every school in Wyoming. He texted me the other day. A week ago, I was in Miami with the mayor of Miami. While we were talking, he wants to implement Rachel's Challenge. And I'm not here to promote our program. You don't need our program to see what the principles that we're talking about put into action. But he said, we want Rachel's Challenge in every school in Miami. While we were talking, a police officer came in, whispered in his ear that there had just been 4 young men murdered there in his city. And he had to leave to go to a press conference while I did a presentation to his staff. So the things that I know that the Jesse Lewis Choose Love Foundation is doing, they're doing right. The things that we're doing work, and they're done right. So please, in your examinations of all the other things, consider that there are great programs out there that have learned a lot by feet on the ground. Why Try, Kickstart, Jesse Lewis Choose Love Foundation, Rachel's Challenge, many others. Some of them are fluff. And the truth is, most anti-bullying programs that focus on bullying create more bullying. Because what you focus on, you become. So we don't focus on the negative, we focus on the positive. My daughter was simply sitting outside the school, having lunch with a friend, when the first bullets from all of these school shootings hit her body and took her life. My son Craig was in the library where most of the killing would take place with 2 of his close friends, Matthew Kechter and Isaiah Scholes. And Craig and Isaiah and Matt were sitting and talking when they heard what they thought were firecrackers outside the school. A few minutes later, the 2 boys came into the room and opened fire, and they killed 10 students all around my son. He didn't know that his sister had already been killed outside the school. Craig and his 2 buddies dove underneath a desk, and Eric and Dylan came over to the table where they were, and they began to taunt one of his closest friends, Isaiah Scholes, with racial slurs moments before they shot and killed him. And then they turned their guns on Matthew Kechter, who was an upcoming star on the football team, and they shot and killed Matthew. And my son lay there covered in the blood of his 2 friends, looking down the barrel of 2 guns aimed at him. And he knew that he was going to die. In a split second before they pulled the trigger, the alarm system went off from smoke in the room that distracted the boys, and they never came back to the table where Craig was at, or I would have lost 2 of my children that day. I don't know if I could be here if that had happened. 1 is too many. We challenge young people with, when I spoke before a House Judiciary Committee 19 years ago, we had this same kind of setting. And I didn't intend to do this, but I'm going to share the poem that I shared with them 19 years ago. Your laws ignore our deepest needs. Your words are empty air. You've taken away our heritage. You've outlawed simple prayer. Now gunshots fill our classrooms and precious children die. You look for answers everywhere and ask the question, why? We regulate restrictive laws through legislative creed, and yet we fail to understand that God is what we need. I wasn't saying that to you. I was saying that to them 19 years ago. I don't believe that we can bring religion back into schools, and that's not my agenda at all. My agenda, though, is to bring back some of the things we tossed out with, we tossed the baby out with the bathwater too often. The moral values, the character development, the simple things that are common sense that we can do every single day really do work. We need to return civility back to our nation, and that begins with us modeling it as leaders. And if we expect our children to be civil to one another, how can we be on national television, be slashing and calling names and all of the things that goes on? We must model. And so our challenges are simple. We begin our first challenge, whether it's to the corporate world, Motorola, or right now I'm speaking to all the Bank of America teams around the country, whether it's to the corporate world or to kindergartners. The first challenge is the challenge to look for the best in other people. Because if you look for the best in other people, you're never going to have a problem with prejudice. And it's helping our children learn these simple things that will prevent a lot of the violence that will take place if we don't teach them those things. We teach them to choose mentors in their life. We choose them to choose right influences. And everything is geared around stories. Stories change the world. That's what we do. Whether you ever have Rachel's Challenge come to a school in your area or not is not as concerning to me as that we at least teach our children by the way we model our own behavior and by the things that we do and that we say. There's a lot more I could say, but I want to end by saying connection is such a vital and important thing for children. We do a program for teachers called 180 Connections. There's 180 days in the school year. And with that program, we tell them to take 3 minutes of every class right in the beginning, because research shows that if you simply will stand at the door, smile at your student as they walk in, call them by their first name, and give an appropriate touch, fist bump, a handshake, a high five, or a pat on the shoulder. Just that act repeatedly done day after day, and this is not our research, it's done by others, shows that their ability academically will be raised by 27%. We should be practicing that in every classroom in America. We've added another piece to that, and that is every single day the teacher begins the class by saying something personal about themselves. My favorite dessert is pecan pie. Now, you guys break down into groups of 3, no more than 4, and talk about your favorite dessert. What does that do? It connects the kids to each other. Here's a picture of my dad and my mother when I was a little boy. I wasn't born old. I was actually at your age at one time. See those big ears? And we teach children to make for the teacher to connect with a child, and in doing so to help the children connect with each other. Those simple solutions bring powerful results. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Next, we are turning to Dr. Derek Odell. Dr. Odell is currently a veterinarian in the Roanoke, Virginia area. He was a student at Virginia Tech at the time of the mass shooting there. Dr. Odell works in his community to help victims of violent crimes. Welcome, Dr. Odell.
And thank you for convening this commission, and thank you, commission members, for hearing our stories. Certainly this is a very personal topic for all of us in this part of the panel. And, for me personally, I survived a school shooting, as you mentioned, at Virginia Tech on April 16, 2007. I just turned 20 during my sophomore year in college, and I felt invincible. I never pictured a school shooting happening. I'd heard of Columbine, but never pictured it happening at our school. I never had active shooter drills when I was an elementary or primary school student, so it never really fazed me as far as that always happens to other communities. I'm extremely thankful to be here today to share my story personally with you all, as I know many are not able to share their story. My wife is also a high school teacher, Laura, at Salem High School in Southwest Virginia, and our daughter will eventually go to high school or public school, and maybe even her high school. My wife and I, as many other parents of school-age children, have a vested interest in the safety of our children, as their care is entrusted to our school leaders as we leave them throughout the day. To provide some insight on what uniquely happens during a school shooting, the following is my personal testimony on what happened to me during April 16, 2007, as it's hard to picture yourself in a classroom shooting. Fortunately, it's not a process that happens to a lot of people in this country, but certainly is happening more and more frequently with cause for concern. On April 16, 2007, I was in a classroom on the second floor of Norris Hall on Virginia Tech's campus when a loud popping noise disrupted our class. Our professor, Jamie Bishop, stopped teaching and opened the door to look in the hallway to investigate the noise. We thought it was construction. He returned shortly thereafter, shut the door behind him, and continued teaching. Within seconds, the door swung open and the popping noise began in our classroom. Gunfire began to tear through our class. I froze in my chair for what seemed like an eternity until I slowly saw the handgun tore towards me, and I dove below my desk. The shots continued as I tried to put as much distance between the gunman and myself as I could in the classroom. The gunman reloaded his magazine and proceeded down the hall to the next classrooms. Many students in the class lay motionless and quiet. The door was still open, and I decided that the gunman could easily regain entry to our class and further decimate my classmates. I tried to make my way to the front of the room, only entry and exit door to the class. Being a second-story building or second-story classroom, the building windows were certainly high up off the ground. I reached for my cell phone to try and call 911. At that point, I felt a sharp pain in my right arm. I realized I had been shot sometime during the initial gunfire and could see my arm bleeding through my jacket. At that time, I applied a tourniquet and was on the phone with the emergency responder trying to describe the gunman and relay as much information about the wounded in my class as I could. Then the gunfire temporarily stopped. I could hear footsteps outside the door in the hall. I saw the door handle jiggle that I had barricaded with my body since there was no door lock. The force from the other side of the door tried to regain entry. It failed. With the help of my classmate, we were able to keep the shooter out. Then bullets began to rain through the solid wooden door, narrowly missing me but hitting my classmate's hand who was barricading the door with me. The barricade held strong, and the gunman proceeded down the hall and continued with gun shut. We assessed the injured in our class, trying to apply first aid as we could. The gunfire eventually stopped as we heard the sounds of police officers in the hallway. They opened the door and escorted us, those able to walk, out of our classroom and the building hurriedly. The officers encountered a door that they had not entered. The door was chained shut from the inside, padlocked, and the only way to get out the door was for the officers to fire and hit the padlock and allow us to escape to the emergency personnel. Certainly, I'm thankful to be here today to speak to you, because again, there are many of my classmates and professors who were not. The most alarming thing for me looking back on the shooting was the preparation that our shooter did prior to the shooting. As many have talked about on this panel, and as Michael has adequately explained in Virginia Tech's response, is that the shooter had a marked preparation for the shooting. It's not something that he just snapped. He had posted bomb notices that around the campus for weeks prior to the shooting to assess the police response, trying to figure out how long it would take police to go to a building after a note had been found. As Mike mentioned, the doors at Virginia Tech, the majority of them were able to be chained shut, delaying the police entry into the building. He had chained all 3 entry and exit doors to the building, so the police, it was 9 minutes for the whole Virginia Tech shooting before police could gain entry to the hall, and the shooter committed suicide. Since then, Virginia Tech has changed all the doors, and I remained a student at Virginia Tech for 6 years and felt the safest I'd ever been on a community campus. So I think they have done an amazing job as far as the response to that shooting, and other universities and other primary schools have taken that same note in changing their school doors or planning for future building renovations to help prevent future issues. The shooter went by many of the classrooms on the 2nd floor repeatedly to see how many students were in each class and the layout of the classrooms. The police responded quickly, and again, unfortunately, weren't able to gain entry to the classrooms very quickly. Most campuses utilize some form of emergency alert notifications. At Virginia Tech, the shooter had actually committed a shooting across campus a few hours prior to this shooting in Norris Hall, and the campus wasn't notified of that because at the time, not every student had personal cell phone devices, and there was no emergency alert notification system that was broadly used at the time. The emergency alert system that was used was a single system, and unfortunately wasn't working on all the speakers. And wasn't notified until after the 2nd shooting. So utilizing a campus security system, which has now been in place for pretty much every campus college community in the United States, as well as other primary schools. The availability of social media devices, phones, even within Virginia Tech, they have message boards within each of the class, just in case those phones aren't on a notification alert. With many of the topics covered here previously, I think they're certainly vital to the changes that we can see to make this a better process for protecting our students in our schools. One of the things that I think would be beneficial and that Virginia Tech has changed, that would be a simple thing to change within the classrooms, would be implementing a deadbolt or a locking door system. For me, that would have saved probably every person in our room's life, because our professor probably would have locked the door at the apprehension that there could have been some type of gunfire. Even if the gunman was able to gain entry through blasting through the door, it would have allowed us more time to adequately prepare for his entry and potentially either ambush or hide. For me, that's an easy implementation device that hopefully could be implemented in all schools across the U.S. The other part of school safety that I would ask you to consider, it's very difficult to predict how an individual person is going to respond when facing an emergency. For me, I always consider myself to be prepared. I never grew up a Boy Scout, but my dad raised me to be a very good person. And so I always consider all the situations. Being a veterinarian, my job is, trying to figure out what's going on with the animal. And unfortunately, they don't always talk to us. So it's a difficult response trying to figure out what's going to go on. So I consider all the possibilities. And even prior to being shot at Virginia Tech, I considered a lot of the different possibilities. Certainly a school shooting wasn't forefront on my mind when I was sitting in the classroom trying to learn and further my education. When people are prepared for a certain situation in emergency, they have that mindset. But when you're in the classroom, you don't have that mindset. It's hard to overcome that flip of the switch that makes you prepared to respond to an emergency. So in considering your recommendations, I would advise you that it's hard to predict an individual's response to an emergency, even those that are very well prepared, even those that train for this. It's a very difficult thing when you're actually in that certain situation. The mentality, again, of constantly being on edge and preparing for this isn't something that I feel like should be part of the classroom, but certainly preparation is key. But learning is a very difficult process when you're on that edge. For me, I came back to classes shortly after the shooting when they resumed, and I didn't learn a thing for the remainder of the semester. All I could think about was every time that door opened in the back of the classroom, whether this would happen again. Eventually, I furthered my education, earned my doctorate from Virginia Tech, where I was very thankful to stay after they had made changes, but certainly a difficult process to stay in the classroom after that. Also, the notion that arming either public school teachers or individuals within the building may sound like a good idea, but when expecting a briefly trained individual to defend their classroom, a turmoil happening all around them like happened in my classroom, it may result in a much different outcome than what we intend. If I were in the same situation in my classroom and was armed and I accidentally shot a classmate or a professor in the crossfire, I think I would have much more survivor's guilt than I already have. Again, putting public educators in this situation, I don't think should be a priority as far as facing school shootings and diminishing their risk. Again, thank you guys so much for your time and consideration on this panel and considering this topic. I know as my wife goes to school every day, and my daughter eventually grows up to go to school, I can never fathom the thought of losing one of them to one of these school shootings. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Scarlett Lewis. Scarlett's the mother of Jesse Lewis, who lost his life in the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting in 2012. Ms. Lewis founded the nonprofit Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement to ensure that every child has access to social and emotional learning in the classroom and to facilitate this teaching within families, schools, and communities. Welcome, Scarlett.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about a proactive preventative approach to school violence. I think the first panel did an excellent job of defining how we have reacted to the school shootings and putting very good things in place. However, 5 years ago, after Sandy Hook, I was saying this can't be our new normal. And 5 years later, after Parkland, I find myself saying this is our new normal, but it still can't be because we know how to prevent this. We know things to do. We just have to find the courage to do it. I'm going to be talking about a proactive and preventative solution today. So I'm the mom of Jesse McCord Lewis, who was a Sandy Hook school victim, and also JT Lewis, who is here today, that's going to address you next. Following Jesse's murder, I decided to become part of the solution. And Jesse was 6 years old when he was shot in the forehead in his first grade classroom by a former Sandy Hook Elementary School student alongside 19 of his first grade classmates in 2 first grade classrooms and 6 educators in one of the worst mass murders in U.S. history. That was preventable, as are all the other school shootings that we have. I'm here today to advocate for social and emotional learning as an essential part to create safe schools. So up until now, the focus has been on school safety has been based on external safety measures, such as active shooter protocols, single point entries, bulletproof film. External safety measures are extremely important due to the reality of our schools literally being under fire. This, however, does not address the cause or why a student would want to harm an educator or another student. Students want to harm others because they are disconnected, lack resilience, and emotional management. These are skills that can be taught with social and emotional learning. Social and emotional learning cultivates school safety from the inside out. Therefore, it is a full plan. You have external safety measures and you have internal safety measures that address the why. And like somebody mentioned, it's never a snap. People still come up to me and say, wow, Adam Lanza snapped. Of course, we know it's never a snap. Adam Lanza had a lifetime of pain, disconnection, isolation, lack of resilience, and emotional management that resulted in what happened at Sandy Hook. The Sandy Hook Advisory Commission report was released 2 years after the shooting, and their responsibility was to determine how something like Sandy Hook could happen and what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen again. They were given unprecedented access to Adam Lanza's school and medical records, interviews, and other data. The report states the attack on Sandy Hook Elementary appears to have been a purposefully thought out and planned attack. Adam Lanza did not just snap. And this is a hopeful statement because there's always something that we can do to help another's pain. We can prevent school violence. Addressing the symptoms of the issues has been our modus operandi and leaves us always a step behind the problems in reactive mode while the issues continue to escalate. In wanting to become part of the solution, I realize we have many issues in our schools today that relate to school violence and then plague our society. These are the same issues we've been addressing for decades, and they continue to escalate. In addition to violence, there is substance abuse, mental illness, and bullying. These are just examples. Drug overdoses now kill more people than cars and guns combined and are expected to escalate over the next 5 years. We have no plan other than to pour tax dollars into addressing the symptoms. We have a mental health epidemic in our schools. The Child Mind Institute reports that 49.5% of our U.S. youth will have had a diagnosable mental illness by the time they're 18. The majority of that diagnosis is anxiety. The average age for the onset of anxiety is 6 years old in our country, and the vast majority, 70%, will not get professional treatment, so they suffer alone. What do the long-term outcomes of untreated anxiety look like? Interestingly enough, exactly what we're experiencing: violence, substance abuse, mental illness, incarceration, suicide, depression, etc. We know that social emotional learning is the most proactive and preventative mental health initiative we have. We know that it proactively prevents bullying as well as substance abuse. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, bullying has increased in our schools by 21% since we started tracking it in 2003. Bullying continues to get worse despite state-mandated programs and laws we have created through our reactive nature that focus on the issues. My son was murdered by a bully who had also been bullied in school. I attended the DC anti-bullying conference, the White House anti-bullying conference a couple years ago, and that was one of my most frustrating 2 days because we spent 98% of the time in reactive mode, talking about who was bullying who, analyzing the data, what are we doing with the data going forward. There was maybe 2 minutes given to social emotional learning, which we know proactively prevents bullying. Anti-bullying programs do not work. When we treat the symptoms without addressing the cause, we will never get ahead of them. And we haven't gotten ahead of any of these issues. They continue to escalate, despite what is seemingly our best efforts. However, we have a solution. I want to applaud our First Lady Melania's courage to endorse social emotional learning as part of her Be Best campaign. This is a dramatic change from how we've dealt with issues in the past until now. Social and emotional learning is a proactive and preventative approach that addresses the cause of all of these issues that scientific research shows proactively reduces and prevents substance abuse, mental illness, bullying, and violence. That means stopping the suffering before it even starts. Social and emotional learning teaches kids how to get along, how to have healthy and positive relationships, deep and meaningful connections, skills and tools for resilience, emotional management, conflict resolution, and responsible decision-making, among other qualities. In fact, these are all things that employers value most, above IQ. When researching a solution for what took my son's life, I was heartened to find that there is one, and it's called social emotional learning. In fact, I've dedicated my life to spreading awareness of the solution to the issues our children face and that face our society. And I've made it my life's mission to make sure that every child has access to what we know through decades of research is in every child's best interest and the best interest of our society. If Adam Lanza had had social and emotional learning in school, my son and other precious little children and educators would be alive today. This is backed up by years of research as well as the determination from the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission and the Child Advocate report that came out of the tragedy at Sandy Hook. I'm going to read some expert excerpts now from the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission report as well as the Child Advocate report that were released 2 years after the Sandy Hook massacre. Quote, while all students benefit from a concerted focus on social emotional learning, for students struggling with mental health and or developmental disorders, inadequate supports for social and emotional wellness and a lack of attention to SEL can have particularly deleterious consequences. The report issued from Connecticut's Office of the Child Advocate emphasizes the striking absence of social emotional learning in Adam Lanza's educational records. Despite the centrality of social, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to Adam's identified disabilities, his individual education plan was directed almost exclusively towards supports for his academic progress. For example, a quote from the Child Advocate report states, attention to Adam's severe disabilities focused on curricular issues rather than on the social and emotional characteristics that were seriously impacting his ability to participate in a regular education environment. End quote. The Child Advocate's investigation concluded that the absence of a plan to address Adam's social emotional issues likely contributed to a situation in which he eventually became increasingly withdrawn and socially isolated. The Child Advocate report specifically asks, is there a reluctance to serve youth's social emotional learning needs in schools? Here is the recommendation from that report. Schools must have capacity to address social emotional learning, offer evidence-based social skills curriculum, skill building regarding social pragmatics, and other supports. All of the scientific evidence for decades show that children that have social and emotional learning get better grades and test scores, higher attendance and graduation rates, better classroom and school climate, increased positive relationships and connections, less stress and anxiety, less behavioral issues, and less bullying. There is research now that has followed kindergartners all the way into adulthood that found kids that had social emotional learning have less substance abuse, less mental illness of all kinds, less incarceration, less violence, and even less divorce rates. Decades of scientific research prove this, and it makes common sense as well. Columbia University did a study that found for every $1 invested in social emotional learning, there is an $11 net present value returned to the community. I can't think of a better investment than our most precious asset, our youth. In fact, the donors who support the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement believe so strongly in the life-transforming and life-saving potential of social and emotional learning that we are able to offer our pre-K through 12th grade comprehensive social and emotional learning program called the Choose Love Enrichment Program to all educators and students at no cost. This program is now in all 50 states and over 55 countries. We have transformed and saved lives. There is no excuse not to do this. So, as our First Lady Melania has proposed, we must be proactive and preventative in our approach to violence in schools. If we continue to be reactive, we will always be one step behind, as we have been, and these tragedies will continue unabated. We can proactively prevent school violence as well as substance abuse and mental illness by implementing social and emotional learning in our schools on a regular basis. In the concluding thoughts section of the Sandy Hook Advisory Report, it states, as a state and a nation, we must seek out and embrace measures that will foster resilience. All of the Commission's recommendations promote a broad and holistic approach to mental health across the lifespan. Such an approach will prioritize social, emotional, and psychological wellness across our culture. Further, the report states, schools must play a critical role in fostering healthy child development and healthy communities. They should provide learning tools geared toward positive development and serve as a locus. Healthy social development should be actively taught in schools. Our education system has prioritized children's cognitive development at the expense of their social and emotional development, and this disproportionate focus on academic achievement threatens to become even more entrenched. Research clearly demonstrates, however, that social and emotional learning curricula have a positive impact on child's development and actually enhance their academic progress. Actually, social emotional learning is the foundation of academic performance. Recommendations from the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission on how to prevent another Sandy Hook massacre state: social emotional learning must form an integral part of the curriculum from preschool through high school. It works best when it is a pervasive component of the school environment that informs the culture of the school and the behavior of adult educators. Too often, school administrators and teachers view SEL as secondary to academic curricula, worrying that time spent on aspects of SEL will detract from students' academic achievement. As a result, even evidence-based SEL curricula are rarely included past the earliest grades, and where SEL is taught, it rarely receives the time and attention it deserves. All schools should implement a sequenced social development curriculum. That's what we learned from the Sandy Hook tragedy 5 years ago. There is no mass murder gene. Mass murderers are cultivated into what they become by their environments. Likewise, there is no SEL gene. We must learn these skills and tools, and if we didn't learn them in school or from our parents, we simply don't have them. The bottom line is this: social and emotional learning is an integral part of school safety. SEL cultivates safety from the inside out by teaching kids the skills and tools they need and that we know proactively prevent violence. This takes SEL from a nice to have to a need to have. A comprehensive school safety plan must include social and emotional learning. External safety measures are important, however, they do not address the cause of violence. The only way to proactively prevent school violence is to address the cause and provide students with the tools and skills necessary to navigate their life and future. The Commission report continues. Comprehensive youth development can prepare young people to meet the challenges of adolescence and adulthood through a progressive series of activities and experiences that foster social, moral, emotional, physical, and cognitive growth. In this context, a coordinated comprehensive system of support services for all students ensure that their physical, social, emotional, and health needs are met and their school environments are safe and orderly while also promoting their optimal academic development. Jesse died a hero. Jesse chose to use his final moments to save 9 of his classmates' lives at 6 years old. When the gunman, Adam Lanza, stormed into his first grade classroom after murdering his counselor and principal in the hallway right outside their classroom door, he continued shooting until his gun ran out of bullets. It was during this short delay, and as Adam changed the ammunition clip on his gun inside the classroom and in front of the kids, that Jesse yelled for his friends to run. They said it's because he told them to run that they made it to safety. We believe Jesse stayed to protect his teacher. I talk about Jesse's bravery because this is the same courage that we all have within us in this room. We must call upon that courage right now to do what we know is in the best interest of our children. Schools must be a safe haven for our children and our educators. We know what to do. Now we have to find the courage to do it. Social and emotional learning must be a part of every school safety plan by cultivating safety from the inside out and addressing the cause of the tragedies that have become commonplace in our schools. We must choose social and emotional learning in our schools. It is the solution. And I will read the Margaret Mead quote that we all know so well. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and dedicated citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that thoughtful group is in this room. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scarlett. Really, really appreciate it. Our next speaker is Mr. Joseph Lewis, or JT, I think as he likes to be known, the brother of Jesse Lewis. After the shooting at Sandy Hook, JT started an organization called Newtown Helps Rwanda and raises money to send orphaned Rwandan genocide survivors to college. JT, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all for allowing me to speak to this commission on school safety. I'm thankful for the opportunity to share my voice and my ideas where they might be useful. Before I give you my thoughts on how we can make schools safer, I wanted to tell you about my experience on December 14th, 2012. The day started out like any other, and I figured it would end the same way, going home and having an elaborate, detailed-filled conversation with my mom about my day. She'd ask, "How was school that day, honey?" I'd respond, "Fine." But instead, on that morning, our middle school was in a total lockdown. My fellow classmates and I huddled in the back of the classroom, exchanging what little information we could find on our phones. Someone got a text that said there'd been a shooting at the nearby elementary school. I remember one friend actually started to choke up and almost cry. "My sister's at that school. I hope she's okay." Maybe it was my naive 12-year-old mind, but I told him to stop overreacting. Everything was fine. The text was wrong. Those kinds of thoughts hadn't crossed my mind yet. Then the details started coming in. Still stuffed in the back of a cold, dark Spanish classroom, every one of our faces were illuminated by our phone screens. We were on news sites, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere where we could find out what was going on. Soon, as rumors became confirmed, we started to realize how serious what had happened at the elementary school really was. There was a death toll. Most of us recognized names. As soon as the lockdown at my middle school had ended, I was picked up by a family member and chauffeured to the now famous firehouse. Located next to the elementary school, this is where families gathered to find out if their children and parents were alive or not. About an hour into the wait, someone casually walked over to our family and told us we fell into the category of not. Every time there's a mass shooting, seemingly quite frequently, the first thing you hear is, "No one should have to go through something like that." And then everyone goes about their lives and forgets. And then another shooting happens, sometimes only a week or two later, and again we hear, "No one should have to go through something like that." My point is, this committee, this administration, has the opportunity to do something special, put a stop to these shootings. In the years following the shooting, we met with the former Secretary of Education, we met with governors and senators, we even met President Obama, the whole time hoping someone, anyone, would help us put a stop to these senseless killings. Not one helped. The shootings continued, nothing changed, they accomplished nothing. These politicians could never veer from their party's anti-gun agenda to actually make our schools safe. Our country is built on the foundation of the Second Amendment. Our right to bear arms isn't about hunting. It's about protecting ourselves and those we love when our government can't or will not. Regardless, there are over 300 million guns in the country. They're not going anywhere anytime soon, whether we not like it or not. It's been over 19 years since Columbine, 11 years since Virginia Tech, 5 years since Newtown. All that time spent predominantly on gun control agenda, whatever form that might look like. At some point, we'll need to admit that platform has failed and move on to reasonable and attainable measures. And then President Trump gets elected and takes office. A year later, the Parkland shooting happens. For the first time in my young life, I heard a president, an entire administration, that wanted to put an end to these school shootings with reasonable school safety measures. Things that could actually be accomplished. It wasn't the same old time to get rid of guns talking point. President Trump recently tweeted, and don't worry, it's a good one. History shows that a school shooting lasts, on average, 3 minutes. It takes police and first responders 5 to 8 minutes to get to the site of the crime. Highly trained, gun-adept teachers or coaches would solve the problem instantly before police arrive. A divisive path, and also a rather expensive one, is to have an SRO or armed guard, preferably 2, in every school. These schools in Newtown are now some of the most safe schools in the country. That's because after the shooting, our schools implemented measures like armed guards. They're not doing that for show. They're doing it because it works. Unfortunately, because I'm not a big government type of person, the government does need to get involved in some way. Schools are legally not responsible for the safety of their students. The Newtown school system was not accountable for my brother, and they walked away without even an apology to the victims' families. We need to make sure that every school in America is as secure as the post-shooting Newtown schools are. Some argue that putting armed guards in schools makes them feel like prisons. This is a ridiculous argument. After 9/11, airports added extensive security. At first it felt odd, but after time passed, people grew used to the additional security because it was for their own safety. The same is true with schools. We can implement armed guards, and in time we will grow used to it because it's for the safety of our nation's youth. 3 of the most recent school shootings in Florida, Maryland, and even yesterday in Illinois were stopped by a school resource officer. They were able to quickly apprehend the shooters in all 3 cases. There was 1 death combined between those shootings. That compared to Newtown, Parkland, and Columbine, where there were combined 56 deaths and countless more injured. Obviously, having a first line of defense inside our schools works. President Trump recently said, there is no sign more inviting to a mass killer than a sign that declares this school is a gun-free zone. I couldn't agree more. It's just common sense. How hypocritical it is that many of our politicians go around with full security detail, armed to the teeth, while our kids are sitting ducks in outdated and unprepared schools. What if those same politicians valued the lives of our nation's youth as equally as their own? The president said it best, we must harden schools. It's that obvious, it's that simple. The idea that an armed guard is the best way to fight an armed intruder is hard to argue against. In fact, I've talked with politicians and media on both sides of the aisle, and privately, the idea has lots of support, more than enough to get something of substance done. To sum this up, what do I think schools should do to keep kids safe? Put in 2 armed guards in every school, whether they are armed teachers, retired police or military, or active police. Simple measures like anonymous hotlines to report threats seem as obvious as they are necessary. If you ask, and I have, most kids will tell you they can identify the next shooter. Make sure every school is only accessible through a single entrance. All side entrances should be locked. This way, in the event of a shooter, you know exactly where they are. Finally, schools must start to take responsibility for the safety of their students. Parents are starting to wake up to the fact that when their kids are at school, they, the parents, are solely responsible for their safety. Soon, they will demand a change, and I will stand with them when they do. I look forward to continuing to work with this commission and this administration to stop these mass shootings. Thank you for having me speak today.
Thank you so much, JT. Our final speaker is Mr. Ryan Petty. Ryan lost his 14-year-old daughter, Elena, in the awful tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School earlier this year. He's currently serving on the Florida State Commission that is investigating what happened, and we're honored to hear from him today. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me, Madam Secretary and Commission members. Earlier, we heard a statement about, I think the term was low frequency but significant impact event. I hope my words can help convey what the meaning behind significant impact. And Mr. Scott, you mentioned 19 years ago you testified to the Judiciary Committee. Just a few weeks ago I did to the Senate Committee, and I'd like to share some of the things that I said too. In a season of loss, it is difficult to find meaning in tragedy. The senseless murder of so many, including my own beloved daughter Elena, tests the limits of faith. And it demands more endurance than we thought possible. It is a test abruptly forced on us, and we bear it as best we can. Each of us, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, wives of those lost in love, strive to find that meaning. I believe we will be seeking it to the end of our days. However, our abiding faith tells us our Heavenly Father has a plan. Although the loss of our daughter Elena was to us unforeseen, it was not a surprise to Him. This gives us comfort during this difficult time. We will not know what this all means until that time, but we know that this thing that has happened does not mean evil will triumph. It does not mean we may do nothing. It does not mean we should turn against one another. We must not struggle over the ashes in the shadow of our grief. Americans aren't interested in surrendering or curtailing their constitutional rights. That is a simple statement of fact borne out after every similar event. Americans are, however, deeply interested in safe schools, in caring communities, and in secure neighborhoods. As the family of one of the victims, we have also learned at great personal cost that Americans can come together. Policy and political action ought to take their cues from this American majority. We don't all have to agree on everything, and we won't, but we can agree on the most fundamental things. We can agree that students and teachers should be safe. We can agree that schools should be secure. We can agree that law enforcement should be competent and must do its job. I want to focus briefly on that last point. As you've heard earlier, and as is the case in Parkland also, Nicholas Cruz and the deadly danger he posed was the worst kept secret in Parkland. That is, with one inexcusable exception. His was a secret kept from many of the parents of the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Every relevant authority knew he was a deeply troubled youth with potential for lethal violence. The foster system knew it, the FBI knew it, the sheriff's department knew it, the school district knew it. And despite the fact that each of these agencies was fully authorized and empowered to take action well before tragedy struck, not one of them fulfilled their duty. The testament to their failure is 17 dead children and teachers, and 17 more with life-altering injuries, a burden we must bear forever. Add to this failure the failure to warn the parents of the students. By this action or inaction, we were rendered powerless to fulfill our most sacred trust as parents, to protect our children. So forgive me if I don't believe that government is the ultimate solution. Our trust in our institutions and our office holders is deeply shaken. Our broken hearts cry out every moment of every day for the rest of our lives. So what is the solution? The problem of man against evil is as old as humanity itself, and we cannot face it alone. If we think of school violence as a disease, we would not just treat the symptoms or only don protective gear to avoid accidental exposure. We must learn to identify these troubled youth before they turn violent and get them the help they desperately need. We can look to programs like Safe UT in Utah or the work being done by the LA County School District to identify potential threats. And as was discussed earlier, one of the first things I did when I was able to wipe the tears from my eyes long enough to get back on the internet and start using Google, I found this Secret Service report and started to read the characteristics that seemed all too familiar to me. But ultimately, the solution is not in any single policy nor in any piece of legislation, and it's not in any activist's fervent prescription. It's in our hearts. We can try to stop the next Nicholas Cruz with better screening, with competent law enforcement, and with better security, and sometimes we will succeed, but sometimes those measures will fail. Where we stop the next killer is in our homes, in our communities, and through our faith. The best defense against the next Nicholas Cruz is building up strong families where love can be shown to a hurting child. It is in the care we show to a struggling or overwhelmed neighbor. It is in the charity we extend to a stranger. It is in the comfort we give a wounded heart. It is in the kindness we show to an isolated, struggling young man. And I said then, and I repeat now, it is my hope that senseless, tragic events like the one that took my dear daughter will awaken people across our nation that we need to work collectively to create a significant cultural shift. If we work as individuals, as families, communities, churches, and yes, with government, to create an America that is more caring, more kind, more loving, Perhaps we can put an end to these tragedies once and for all. This time can be different. It is my hope that we will. And if we do, it will be the part of us that is most like Elena. Despite what's recently happened, I am optimistic. But there are some things that I think some changes we need to make. When I listened to Mr. Ide's testimony this morning, and I've heard some of the other testimony today, I'm not sure we made the progress we think we have. And that's not to say we don't understand the problem, but the issue seems to lie in implementation and execution at the community, the school district level, and even at the individual schools themselves. When I heard you talk about what happened at Columbine, incident command, radios that malfunctioned, and the response tactics, it appears that 19 years later we've learned nothing. So I would argue for, within our school districts and at all levels, and I'm speaking specifically about K through 12, but we need clear responsibility for campus and school safety. Somebody should be accountable for school safety. Number two, the time to prepare is now. It can happen here. Should be on the minds of every parent and every educator, every law enforcement agency, every school district. It can happen here. We need robust communications between the responsible parties. We've heard that discussed at length here. I can only tell you, in answer to your question, if I could change one thing about Parkland, if I could wave a wand and change one thing, it would be that the school district and law enforcement and social services would have communicated, because they all understood the threat, but none of them put the pieces together. We ask our kids, they're often the source of this information. When I said Nicholas Cruz was the worst kept secret in Parkland, my son and many of the other students at Parkland, when they actually understood that it was in fact a real shooting and not a drill or not firecrackers, the first thought through their mind was, oh, it must be Nicholas Cruz. The entire school knew. But if we're going to ask our students when they see something to say something, we must as adults do something. Thank you again for having me here. I hope that this time will in fact be different, and that we won't simply slide the chairs down the table for the next parents or to come in and testify. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all again for being here and for sharing with us. I again repeat, we're very grateful in your personal pain that you are willing to come forward and share with us your experiences and your observations and your learnings, some of you having worked through this for a longer period of time, and very important food to chew on. I'm going to ask those of us on the side of the table if there's one burning question that you have. I'm looking at our time here, and I know that we have used it up, and I want to respect that. But is there anyone who has one question that they'd like to ask before we conclude? No? All right. Well, on behalf of the department and everyone here, I again offer our sincere gratitude to each of the presenters today. We are grateful for your insights and your sharing your experiences, and again, some so personal and painful. And we again acknowledge that. Your knowledge, broadly shared, is going to help prevent future tragedies. I also want to encourage all members present from other organizations to continue to send in your comments, your ideas, and your solutions to our email address. We have a email address set up at safety@ed.gov, and we look forward to the input there. We're closely monitoring this and fully intend to include all of the responses there, all the feedback in our final report and product. So thank you all as well for your contributions there. And again, thank you to all of our participants today. Very thankful. Thanks.